Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 7:30, so we're going to get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Derek Miranda. I'm the current president of the association. With me here tonight is Richard Slack, treasurer, Paul DeSantis, vice president, Russ Smith, director, and this is Ash and Marshall, our arborists, and we'll get to throw things at them later. So, obviously, we're here to discuss our iconic oak trees leading up to the golf course. We know that this is an aesthetic that's, crucial to Dunes West. We all enjoy it. None of us want to see anything happen to those trees, quite honestly. But the fact is that 18 of them are diseased and dying and will need to come down at some point. Now, we've got multiple opinions on this, and the opinions on the state of the trees are consistent, that they are dead and dying. So as you know, the board's primary job is really to assess risk and prevent risk to the association. So there's two extremes here. There's take all 18 trees down now and have no risk, which would be terrible, of course, or say we're not going to touch the trees at all and accept all the risk. That's not a good option either. Now that we have it in writing from experts that these trees pose a danger to pedestrians and cars, our legal exposure is essentially quadrupled. So something must be done, and we must have a mitigation plan. And that's what we're here to discuss tonight. The board has not rendered any decisions about what we're going to do yet. We want to hear from all of you first, what level of risk you think is acceptable to the association versus the aesthetic. And of course, you can have a lot of questions about the trees, what caused them to die, things like that. I can tell you that they started dying about 30 years ago. So if you look closely at those trees, you'll see some of them are filled with concrete, which is an old arborist trick to try and shore up the tree. We also have a little sliver of a silver lining there in that 30 plus years ago, someone did realize that these trees were beginning to die, and they planted what they call generational oaks. So between the largest of the Grand Design oaks, you'll notice there's smaller yet mature oaks. Somebody planted those about 30 plus years ago so that when these come down, those take their place. And then you plant new oaks again, and the cycle continues. So I know you have a lot of questions, and Ash here is the arborist that we've been primarily working with. She's highly qualified. Her colleague here, Marshall, I'll note, is one of only 6 master arborists in the entire state of South Carolina, so obviously has a tremendous amount of expertise as well. Please don't throw anything at them, don't shoot the messengers. They don't want to see the trees come down any more than we do, but the reality is there's a real risk there. And if you ever take some time to look at those trees up close, you do not have to be an arborist to see that the vast majority of them are really in really poor health. It's a shame. We all feel it. We're with you. So I'll introduce Ash, and if you want to tell them a bit about yourself and your qualifications, and then maybe take some questions.
Sounds great. So I'm Ash Connelly. I'm an ISA certified arborist. I'm also tree risk assessment qualified. Marshall here beside me is a board certified master arborist and a registered consulting arborist. There's only about 100 of them worldwide that have both of those certifications. And so I've trained under Marshall, and we are highly regarded in Charleston for tree preservation. We write tree preservation plans for trees in construction. The condition of the live oaks along the LA is heartbreaking because some of their conditions could have been prevented with good care a long time ago. But as with medicine, the practices change, right? And the arborists probably at that time used the tools that they had available to them. It's the reason why the association now, and I believe for a while, and hopefully continue to always use certified arborists to care for the trees here. A couple years ago, I was brought to the LA and asked my opinion on the overall health and condition of the trees. I want to stress 2 things. The health of a tree is very different from the structural integrity of a tree. Trees have multiple layers. The center of a tree, it's like the anatomy of your body, is like the arm, right? It is only there for the structural integrity of your skeleton. Then you have layers of tissue that transfer blood and air and oxygen. just like a tree, that's nutrients and water. And then the outer layer, like the bark, like our skin, it's the bark, and it's just there as protective cover. And so, unlike us, trees have the ability to close their wounds, but only in specific places, except for live oaks, which are dominant in our region because they can compartmentalize decay. So they're able to close wounds even if they are not properly pruned, or if they suffer some sort of injury like a branch loss. However, just like us, as they age, they lose that ability to compartmentalize the decay. Some of the practices that occurred years ago that have caused the worsening or progression of the conditions in the trees would include cabling. If you've been in Charleston for a long time and you've seen live oaks, you've seen these steel threaded cables. Well, a current practice is to not use those steel threaded cables because it's too rigid. Trees need movement to allow the creation of reactionary wood. Without the reactionary wood, trees will fail. It doesn't allow the movement, you will have loss, branch loss. If you look in the trees along the alley, you'll find broken cables, you'll find many failed limbs. Many of them have growing fungal conchs. Fungal conchs are the fruit or the flower of a fungal pathogen, and that's of wood decay origin. And so what happens is, we'll give the sidewalk as an example. If the sidewalk was put in and the roots were not properly pruned, disease could get into the root system of the tree, travel through, not the living tissues, but through the center, the non-living tissue of the tree, and it digests what's called the lignin inside that bone. And instead of the tree's canopy being affected, you've got the structural integrity, so that's when the decay happens. Has anybody ever seen a tree split in half or seen the center of a tree? You see the inside is decayed, but the canopy it looked very healthy. So that's internal decay or heart rot. And so what happens is while the tree is growing and it's healthy and its canopy is beautiful, that's a lot of weight. It's a lot of water to transfer, it's a lot of foliage weight to hold. And so as that tree decays and the disease progresses, you're going to see branch loss, you're going to see fracturing. And the unfortunate reality of wood decay pathogens is that just because there's a fungal conch, that mushroom is growing in one area, it doesn't mean that the tree isn't affected in a branch junction further up in the canopy. And that's demonstrated in a lot of the decay that you can see the cavities that are throughout the canopies of those trees. Another commonly misunderstood fact is that while macronutrients like nitrogen are good for trees, excess is not, and it will also feed, it's like the sugar to cancer, the fungal pathogens. Where are those trees growing? Right next to a golf course. And what are they putting on that grass? Lots and lots of nitrogen, which means it is providing these big, beautiful canopies on those trees, right? They're gorgeous canopies. But it's also feeding the fungal pathogens. There's white rot, there's brown rot, ganoderma. There are a lot of diseases that those trees are contending with. And so, like I said before, the concrete in trees is a problem because it gives you this false thought that it is chewing up or it is contributing to the integrity of the tree. However, it's trapping in moisture and it's not allowing that tree to do what it is designed to do, which is to compartmentalize the decay. And so the decay progresses. So many of the trees many of them are in an imminent condition. I would say probably about 5. We're at like 3 to 5 that you look at them and you're surprised that they're still holding their own weight. The others, some are high risk, some have conditions that under the right weather conditions could lead to failure. The problem is their proximity. So when you assess tree risk in trees, you assess targets, the proximity of targets, and the occupancy rate of targets. And so you're talking about a street that I wouldn't say that road is frequented. I wouldn't say it's highly trafficked. I wouldn't say the sidewalk is highly trafficked. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's rarely either, right? And then you look at the severity of the impact, like what is the injury or damage should something fail. And if you've seen the size of the limbs of those trees, you understand that if a strike occurs, it would potentially kill, but definitely severely injure somebody. And so what happened is, a couple of years ago, I got brought in, I looked at the trees and I said, yeah, they're showing the conditions of their age, right? They're showing their age and they're showing their testament. The arboricultural practice changes over time. I recommend seasonal treatments, which our seasonal treatments also have antifungal agents in them, so we're trying to contend with the funguses that are there. But you're trying to contend with additional diseases as opposed to treating the diseases the trees have. You can't treat something that you can't access. The diseases are in that heartwood, the non-living tissue, and so there's no vascular system there, so you can't get treatment to it. But we said treat on a seasonal basis to give them, to increase their health and vigor as much as you can so that they will compartmentalize their decay as much as possible. We applied a tree growth regulator, which is a natural plant hormone that redirects the growth from the canopy, because again, we don't want these trees getting any bigger, they can't lift their weight. It redirects the growth from the canopy to the root system, which we want to encourage growth of, which assists in drought and nutrient uptake. And we did reduction pruning, mostly to try to preserve the generational trees. My objective at that time was to protect those generational trees that would be at risk if a limb failed. Over the course of, I believe it was 2 years ago when we applied that, 2 years, we've seen a lot of failures, limbs failing, at least, I don't know, once a quarter. It's been pretty frequent. And so this year I was challenged with, so far in my career, the hardest thing I've ever done. And I will tell you, I spent a lot of time with those trees. A lot of time. And there are some mitigation options available, but some of those trees don't have anything left to cable to. And where you would cable isn't reliable. And at the end of the day, again, it's the HOA's acceptable level of risk. And Lisa can tell you, I've said many times, if they were trees in my yard, I'd say keep them. I would say just live with it. But they're not trees in my yard. And I, as well as Marshall, served as expert witnesses in many Marshall in the court cases, me at the BZA, and we get to witness the ugly side of what happens when limbs fall. And we get to see, on Johns Island and River Road, how many injuries there are, and how many cases are against SCDOT for poor inspection. And as much as I would love to say, it's your acceptable level of risk, keep all the trees, let them live as long as they can, understand that the board is challenged with a really difficult decision on, once you're put on notice, how accountable are you to the path that's chosen, right? And I say that I was an insurance defense paralegal for 12 years before I became an arborist. So I have also seen that side. And so I digress. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, as well as Marshall.
Yeah, before that, I'll tell you that this is the report here. And we're going to post this to the website for you so that you can read it. And
and I'm going to interrupt you real quick. What that is basically my data collection. So Marshall will prepare a final report. It's not ready yet. It takes a full registered consulting arborist booklet style report for this many trees. It's going to be over 100 pages, and it's going to go through every condition and definitions of those conditions so that you can understand them. It's going to go through the risks and targets and everything I talked about. But this is primarily photographs, data collection. So just FYI.
yeah, and everything she said, of course, as a board member, we never take anything at face value. So we spoke to our attorneys, and Nelson Mullins has a lot of attorneys on staff, and some that specifically deal with this exact area. So we do have confirmation that yes, if something were to happen today, now that we've had this conversation and we have this information, we would basically be in a real world of hurt. So we also have some issues with insurance that we're gonna have to look at. If we keep those trees there, can we maintain insurance?
But a lot of our risk is immediately mitigated a bit by having this meeting, by putting up signs to say there is risk there. And so as long as we keep a diary of everything that we do, then that mitigates a lot of the risk right there, I believe, does it not?
Right, it does, and that was a part and a function of that initial email that you got saying that all 18 are diseased and okay, yes, sir.
Yes, if the board's goal is to minimize risk here, I'm curious, pine trees are very susceptible to falling over, or arborists, I'm sure, to tell you that. So, would the board entertain taking down thousands of trees that are along the streets and sidewalks?
No, because there's a big difference. There's a big difference. Random trees that are in the woods that we have no prior knowledge of have a completely different legal distinction. Once a certified arborist expert tells us that this is a risk to human life, our legal exposure is completely different.
So getting hit by a falling tree, being killed with it, it's like 1 in 20 million.
Yeah.
And getting hit by lightning is like 20 times less risk.
But it does happen. Biltmore Estates is currently embroiled in a massive lawsuit for killing 2 people with the exact same circumstances.
I understand that, but by the same token, you're probably more likely to get hit by a speeding vehicle out there.
Okay, so let's look at it this way then. If our total bank balance and total assets is somewhere around $5 million and we have to pay out $20 million, what happens to Dues West?
We don't have insurance.
I just mentioned that if we don't do anything, we don't have insurance. So,
Well, I
And our
think
insurance
some of
is
these
covered
other things
20.
are also an act of God.
yeah,
If a tree
Force
is hit by
majeure.
lightning and falls down, that's covered by act of God.
it's force
But
majeure.
if we're told that it's going to come down because it's sick or dying, then that's a whole different level of risk for us, I think.
It becomes negligence. Yes, sir.
So are we going to survey the trees that are within areas of risk to make sure that they're structurally sound?
So
No,
the
we-
reason I was asked to look at those trees specifically and give an opinion, so again, remember, a couple of years ago, I came through and we started treating them, did some pruning to them. At that time, they had condition, they had some of the same conditions, some of the conditions have worsened. And at that time, I brought it to the board's attention that the trees, some of the trees were high risk. However, it was after, and they felt like, I'm presuming, because nothing was done at that time, that was an acceptable level of risk. However, after that point, limbs progressively were falling. And so then they were responding to, hey, we're seeing limbs fall frequently. Can you give us your greater opinion of each tree and the risk that it poses? So there was an act that then caused them to question. So like I would contend that healthy pine trees don't pose a high risk. Healthy pine trees, I believe, I have gone to the town of Mount Pleasant council meeting to protect pines, actually. I believe pines serve a very important role in our forests. However, if a tree or trees are presenting conditions or have had things occur, you have to have them looked at, otherwise then they're ignoring their duty.
So, Sean Cunningham with Spring Marsh. So first of all, thank you for bringing out the arborists and doing multiple years of inspections. I do appreciate that. I think that's important, and I'm glad that you've chosen people who are clearly very experienced and knowledgeable.
Thank you.
We talked about how there's a spectrum here between completely removing all of our risk, getting rid of all the trees. I mean, I'm sure we could clear out 50 feet on both sides of the road too to make sure everything's super safe in all directions. But we also talked about how there's different options available. So I'd like to know what spectrum of choices do we have that can not completely remove the risk, but like the treasurer mentioned, mitigate our risk. Having a meeting like this, putting up signage, maybe removing the 5 trees that are just absolutely not savable or salvageable. What kind of options can we choose like that? And then maybe we have this meeting in another year and evaluate if the risk has actually gotten considerably worse.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what will occur. I mean, me personally, I'm leaning towards taking out the 5 that are ready to fall at any moment, and then just doing mitigation practices for the remainder of them. I certainly don't want to see them all come out. I'll let her speak to different pruning and trimming practices that may or may not be done, but keep in mind, I mean, this was my thought, that if some of these trees are really diseased, but yet somehow viable a little bit, and you trim the heck out of it, is that gonna look worse than the tree being gone? I don't know. I don't know. Well, hang on, there's a gentleman back there that wanted to ask a question. I'd like to give her the opportunity to answer Sean's.
Maybe the question, does it tag along with his question as well?
Oh, yeah.
Back here?
Yeah.
Oh, well, hold on. I didn't know if you had
I
it.
have a question.
Sorry.
We know what caused the problems on these trees. You know, they were made for carriages and horses. And that's the bottom line. There wasn't tons of nitrogen put into them and so forth. So the disease are going to be a problem in the future. Some of them can have a Band-Aid on them and so forth, but what are you going to plan for the future for the next couple hundred years? You know, that's going to be, you know, the question of cleansing.
Well, there's generational oaks that are there, so obviously we'll continue with that practice and
Yeah,
just answer both if you.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things. So as far as mitigation options, it becomes very challenging because the canopies of these trees, where you would cable, you'd install additional cables, the limbs are not very reliable. So then you look at some reduction, some heavy reduction pruning would have to happen. But again, every time you prune the end of a branch, you're opening up like a water hydrant, right? And you're allowing that tree, it's like a pressurized system, and so the tree is unable to send all of its resources to close that wound. And so you're temporarily solving the problem, but you're also advancing the problem at the same time because you're stressing this tree that's trying to compartmentalize its wounds. So yeah, we can do reduction pruning. It will not, and the thing I stress is we are not going to be able to eliminate the risk. And you can't eliminate risk with most trees. Every tree poses somewhat of a risk. There's like I said, cabling, reduction, pruning, continuing to do tree growth regulator every 3 years. And then as far as planting goes, or we talked about even like, could you move the sidewalk? Is the sidewalk, you would reduce the amount of traffic there because a lot of the limbs, some of them can be reduced to only overhang the sidewalk and not as much over the road. But then if you move the sidewalk to the other side of the tree, now you've impacted the roots on the other side of the tree. Trees grow their roots in the points of least resistance. And so those trees have acclimated to that environment by growing their roots towards the golf course, probably where they're tapping into the nitrogen. So maybe you turn it into a gravel path and you remove the cement of the sidewalks. Maybe you discontinue use of the sidewalk. I mean, there are a lot of creative ways to mitigate the risk. And then as far as planting or planning long-term, someone wrote a letter, and I believe it was maybe the gentleman in the back based on the facts he was given, and I think it was a great idea. So you can, a perfectly planted tree has like a 30% success rate. And so that's really disheartening. But some of that has to do with the tree being grown in a nursery, not acclimated to its surroundings. So if this community is phasing out its options over the course of a couple of years, why not start growing those trees here in the environment it would be already acclimated to, and then carefully root pruning over the course of a year, and then which allows the tree to acclimate to less roots. Because when you plant a tree, you're spading out and losing about half of that tree's root system. But there are companies in Florida who have perfected the practice of root pruning in stages over the course of a year and then moving these larger caliber trees. And so that's an option. It's a greater success rate, but the larger the caliper you install from a remote location, the less viable the tree is. It has a hard time acclimating. So, yeah.
For the experts in the room, so if hypothetically we go with the option of only taking out the sidewalks, and we've got diseased trees and fungus and all this other stuff we're talking about, what sort of risk are we posing to generational trees that we absolutely want to save?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, science says that healthy trees don't get diseased. Now, trees are communal. Their root systems fuse together and they support each other. It's the reason some of these trees likely pass some of these pathogens to each other. However, science says they're supposed to already be stressed or in a state of decline in order for them to contract the disease. Even if you took out reducing the exposure by removing the tree for the pathogen doesn't really exist, because the fungal pathogens actually live in a matting and a mycelial layer under the soil, and then they can live there for decades. I think that someone from Clemson in the room, yeah, so Clemson's done a lot of research on it. They can live, these pathogens can live in the soil in that mycelial layer for, I think it's decades. So it's already there. It's already there.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Scott Reeves. The generational trees, how many years do you think we have on them before they get to be similar canopies in size? I mean, we're talking about a decade, 50 years, what we're talking
I
about?
think it all depends on how they're cared for from
Can
here on.
we mitigate that by cutting down some and keeping the other group going a little bit longer until that occurs?
Yeah, a lot of it depends on what kind of resources the association commits to protecting the trees, regular fertilizations, monitoring, et cetera, which I'm pretty sure that we're unanimous in that we want to implement a program of that nature, but not just for these oaks, but we have other oaks around Dunes West, right? We have other iconic grand oaks that we need to look at and start paying attention to. Certainly don't want to lose those as well. So
Is there an estimate though, a range?
we're working on it. We're working on numbers.
Not a cost, a time.
Timeline, so how fast, so those trees are right around 100, maybe a little over 100 years old. Someone wrote a note that said they were planted by Henrietta Hartford, and they were approximately 100 years old. That means they've grown about an inch a year, and some a lot less. And trees' growth is dependent on nutrients in the soil, their availability, like the growth pattern of a tree is based on light. It doesn't have to do, a tree will still grow just as quickly if another tree is nearby, because again, they're supporting each other. It's just phototropism, they're gonna grow in a different direction. So I think it's just regular monitoring and treatment, but that's beyond, you guys, we think we just need to give, just like ourselves, medicine, right? We have to create the environment. So the trees need mulch, like mulch rings around them would assist in increasing the microbial activity. So soil is living, and what creates the micro and macronutrients that trees uptake is actually the decomposing of woody material, leafy material. That's why the forest floor is so rich, and that's why when you develop communities, that's why the trees struggle, because you're removing that decades-old, rich, nutritious soil. So you have to recreate that. That's one of the things that, like I said, we seasonally treat, not those trees, and the community has already taken part. We're treating on a seasonal basis the alley that runs along Harper's Ferry as well. But our treatment doesn't just feed the tree, it's feeding those microorganisms. It's feeding it's seeking to increase them, the microbial activity.
So on that, which is interesting, I mean, we're blessed because we have a number of plantations that are around here in Dan Coyle, right in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I drive past, down these wonderful avenues of trees at Boone Hall and whatnot. Can we do something to change the environment to make those trees thrive, maybe removing the concrete and the pavement that's out here and having more of a gravel or a dirt road that would come in and slow the traffic? Is there anything that we can do from the environmental aspect to help preserve and save these trees? Because I'm not seeing this in the plantations that we are surrounded by.
Yeah, that's a bigger issue. The sidewalks, there's a distinction between the sidewalks and the walking paths in the community, the asphalt walking paths. The sidewalks have to be ADA compliant, so there's some regulation that would have to occur there. If we were to change sidewalks, we'd probably have to do a crosswalk over to the other side, because you can't actually have a sidewalk that just dead ends.
I'm sorry, I didn't ask that question. I'm saying, I know that there's like regulations, but would that help, would that be a viable opportunity to, you just spoke about changing the environment to help the trees thrive. I'm I'm not interested in the policy and the regulations. I'm more interested in what would help these trees
So
grow.
return.
Yes, removing the road and taking out the sidewalk would certainly help the trees. In fact, that's probably one of the things that helped start their death in the first place, was when we went down 3 feet to dig a road.
Is that an option then?
Yeah.
To just change this into a gravel or a dirt road?
Well, we'd have to ask our friends at the golf course whether they'd like to all their golfers come in on dirt roads or not, but, 30 years.
Boone Hall has no problem with that.
Well, but Boone Hall is not a residence.
What'd you say? Well, so as far as the Grand Alley of Oaks, anything you do at this point, as far as the road's concerned, it's too late. The only thing you would be doing, my recommendation on the sidewalk is to limit the traffic versus help the trees. The damage has been done. When a tree's root system is double to triple the length that it's tall, and critical roots are defined by at least the drip line. But some science says they're even further, right? And look at how the proximity of that sidewalk, look at the proximity of that road. The root system of those trees has already been damaged. And some of that cutting is what could have. You don't know how they became diseased, right? There's many different reasons, but that could have led to some of the decline in the trees. Trees store sugars in their root system for up to 2 years. And so a lot of times, if you notice in construction, you don't see a decline in the trees until about 2 years later, until they couldn't replenish those starch reserves. And so we're seeing the effects of damage from decades before. And also I want to stress that when a tree is diseased and it has a wood decay pathogen, it is focusing its attention on trying to compartmentalize that decay that's trying to progress within it, and then it fails to employ its natural defenses to pests. So typically, a diseased tree, a tree that has Ganoderma or any other brown rot or white rot, it's more susceptible to termites, to wood boring beetles. Its wood density is actually less. And so that's another concern, is you have these trees who have wood decay pathogens, also have signs of termite activity, also have wood boring beetle activity. I also would like to express the difference, just because I feel like everybody here wants to know about trees, right? So I'm in like my happy place as far as being able to educate. Not my happy place in what I'm having to educate on, but I've got a room full of people who want to learn. And so white rot and brown rot, or wood decay pathogens, they do two very different things in trees. Brown rot is rigid. It creates this almost like checkered consistency of the wood. It just breaks apart, right? That's really rigid. And then white rot is creates more of a foam or a spongy type decay, which is not good because it's not hard enough to hold the tree up, but it does allow movement. And so they do different things when a tree has a white rot pathogen or a brown rot pathogen. So just some knowledge.
We have both.
You have both.
Yes, sir, back
So I'm happy.
there. Sorry, he's been trying to get this in
Yes,
for a
go
while.
ahead.
Two questions.
Sure.
Number one, are these trees native to South Carolina? Number two, is there another type of a tree that would be more hardy, more disease resistant to replace it with? Because what I'm seeing is 30 years from now, we're going to be back at this table. You're probably going to be my age, and you're going to be testing the same question. So can we avoid that?
150 years.
Try to think a little bit out of the box. Or there is a type of tree that would
150
So live oaks are the strongest, most dominant in our region. They grow short and round to sustain in high force winds. They are acclimated to the tropical environment we have. If those were any other tree species, they wouldn't have stood through the damage and the mistreatment those trees have had. So no, I would recommend, if you want a faster grower, yeah, there are different species. If you want a tree that when you plant it, it looks more like a tree than if you plant a very small live oak and it looks like a twig in the ground. You plant a magnolia at a 2.5-inch caliper and it looks like a conical tree, right? So you have short-term solutions, but live oaks are typically your strongest. And with the right care, they will live a very long time. We didn't know what we know now. And so I would contend that with the right care and plan, you could plant trees that would live 200-300 years in that same environment, so long as their roots are protected, their soil is nutritious, and they're not, pruned, and they're pruned properly.
Something I'll mention real quick too. Learning this information, and particularly when she mentioned that, when you first paved the road way back when, roots were cut. For those that don't know, we have a project that's about to begin or going to begin next year where we're repairing a lot of the walking paths because of tree roots that have infiltrated and lifted up. And I said, hold on, because the contractors were going to go in and cut those roots and, you know, smooth out the pavement. And I said, well, this is going to probably be a bigger, more expensive project because I think what we need to do is put soil there and not cut the roots and reshape the walking paths. So that's a debate that the board has to take up yet, but that's my position on it, that we should not be cutting roots anymore. So,
So
especially around
we
those.
have an ADA issue on the Harper's Ferry path right now.
No, not the walking paths.
Walking
Only
path,
sidewalks.
there's no ADA on?
No ADA on walking paths. That's why they're not
This man knows
concrete.
everything.
That's why they're not concrete.
How
Well,
many
and
percent?
there's a couple things, two things I want to point out. One, if you're gonna do anything with trees, consult a certified arborist, right? Like you always want to consult a certified arborist. Two, when you excavate near a tree's roots, you are not just damaging the roots that you touch when you dig into the ground. When you have an actual machinery like a skid steer, right? Or a bobcat or anything that's digging into the ground. When you hit that root, if it doesn't sever, it is pulling and it is breaking that root plate back in stages all the way to the trunk. So you're doing far more damage than just right there where that root and that area is excavated. And then, you know, root cutting can be done, but it has to be properly root pruned and the tree needs to receive treatment. Just like you and I, when we go to the doctor, we're gonna prepare for surgery. The doctor says, please get the best health possible, if you have enough time, right? Take your antibiotic beforehand, not because you already have an infection, but what? The exposure, the opening of that wound on your body increases your susceptibility to infection. Same with trees. So it's not that you can't cut them, or cut the roots, it's just that you have to do so in a manner that allows for the tree to properly heal.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, ma'am.
And do we need to think about asking the golf course to limit how much nutrients are put on the grass along the allele?
Yeah, I'm sure that conversations with the golf course are going to have to occur. I'll tell you that our experience with working with Rich Rankin has been great. He's always been at least a great listener. So
He has a stake in this as well, because
Yeah,
three of the trees out there that are badly damaged are his,
yep.
owned by the golf course.
Yeah, and keep in mind, you know, when this came up and we notified the owner of the golf course, you know, that aesthetic sells weddings. Okay, those trees are a cash cow to him. He does not want to see them gone either. So I'm sure that when we do settle on some sort of plan, that we'll be able to successfully work with the golf course to make sure that we're not inadvertently shooting ourselves in the foot. So, yeah.
Okay, so that might have,
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I just counted on the map. 8 of the trees are on the 18th fairway, where you'd argue there's more nitrogen in it. And on the other side of the street, where there is no fairway, and I can't imagine there's much treatment. So that's point number 1 that may or may not be addressable. Well, point number 2 is you just brought up an interesting point. So there's also the oaks where the weddings happen, right? Which are golf course owned?
Yeah.
So,
No, we started
I'd be
with
curious to know
different-
what the golf course is doing to inspect theirs, because quite frankly, a limb falls in the middle of the wedding and kills somebody.
Right.
Whether or not we're liable, Dunes West is still gonna get sued.
No.
And yes.
No.
Anyone can name anybody in a lawsuit.
Well, you're right,
You will
but-
still have the cost of defending yourself. Whether or not you're gonna lose is 2 different things, but you'll still be named.
So, the Dunes West POA and the Dunes West Golf Club have no legal affiliation whatsoever. We are completely
Tell that to a
separate.
person who wants to sue.
Well, we've been down this road and we're immediately dismissed, so that's definitely not a concern. I'm not worried about the golf course's liability. They and their lawyers will deal with that. I'm
No,
concerned.
I'm still worried about they sue the golf course and they sue the POA, and you have to spend our money to defend what will ultimately be excused, and we ultimately won't be liable, but we'll still have the defense fees.
Well, in those cases, we'd actually reclaim the legal fees.
Our doctors,
Either way, the overall point is golf course doing what you're doing to protect us.
well, Rich Frank is sitting right back here. Rich has been a very proactive guy on his oak trees. Come on, Rich.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm just here to listen, but we do have, we have an arborist that checks our trees. We trim them all the time.
Different arbors?
Yes.
So they have a different conclusion, then, different arborists, different conclusion.
No,
Trees are
it's,
fine.
well,
But I'm just, the trees are so close, it seems curious that these are so diseased, and yet the ones where hundreds of people sit for weddings, are perfectly fine.
The trees that are around the wedding area, are not as old, so that's part of it possibly, but we've been limbing them up, maintaining them, taking off, spading off, those types of things.
Yeah.
So what
Well,
happens?
and the compaction, they don't receive the same level of, you gotta remember, so these trees along the alley, it was footpath, and then it was horse and buggy, and then it was gravel, and then it was cement, and then the sidewalks went in. You know, the trees I think you guys are referring to, they don't have a road in front of them. Their root system hasn't been
Again, I'd like to get
impacted
rid of the road.
on 50%. I know,
Why
it's just,
are you laughing?
We can't do it.
Why?
How are people gonna access?
Yes, sir, I'm sorry, I kept ignoring you. Excuse me, one person speaking at a time,
We've heard
please.
your point, we understand it.
Go ahead, sir.
Laughing, that's it.
No, we're not laughing.
You know?
That's my prerogative. I can laugh, I think it's ridiculous, let's move on.
Yes, sir.
So you're laughing.
Excuse me, gentlemen.
Sir,
Gentlemen,
sir,
I will adjourn this meeting.
We've
I will
heard your
adjourn this
point.
meeting.
We've heard your point.
I have two financial questions.
Yes.
You may have answered the first one already, but I'll ask it anyway. I'll just ask both questions. What is our current insurance coverage against this? And in next year's budget, what is the budgetary allocation for this issue next year?
Well, we were told by Ash to deal with these 18 trees. The current estimate would be around over $100,000 to take them all down now.
yeah, that's not the.
No,
That's worst case.
So what's in,
I'm gonna take close one, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
my question
Okay.
is, what's in the budget?
Excuse me. One person speaking in the room at a time, please. Thank
My
you.
question is, what is in the budget that we're being asked to vote on in 2 days?
Okay.
For next
The
year.
budget has nothing in for the removal of these trees at all,
Okay,
because we did not know at the time I put the budget together.
sure.
Yeah.
That's.
Well, and no decision's been made to remove them.
Right.
That's why we're speaking to all of you.
Okay.
But you're right. In the next year's reserve study, I need to have a new component in there called grand trees and put some sort of useful life out there for what we think will be the plan we put together and begin reserving for that.
I have full trust and confidence.
Right.
You're doing it the right way.
Right.
I'm just asking what.
No,
that
good
is.
question.
Because when I try to read the budget, frankly, about half the lines I understand and half I don't. But, so now I.
Come see me. I'll be happy to.
My first
sir.
question that I didn't
Oh, I'm
get
sorry.
answer to was, what is our current insurance coverage against the risk we have tomorrow?
I'd have to look. We have several different policies, but what it would be in total, I'd have to look and get you that answer. I don't want to just throw a number out.
Sure.
and-
I think the risk was one thing before we knew that they were diseased.
Yep,
Now that we know they're diseased, there's a different risk, so
right.
we need to, at some point.
We
decide-
have a real concern about whether the insurance company will even underwrite us.
Right.
Okay? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so, lots of discussion, thanks for bringing this all together in this conversation, it's great to have transparency and support. So we're gonna get an assessment from the arborist, right, which is really just sort of outlining, here's what the risk factors are, here's what the degradation and timeline is.
Excuse me.
When are we gonna get to here's the management plan? Is that, what's our timeframe for getting that?
We're probably several months away from that. Certainly don't want to rush into it.
Sure.
We want to see this full report, and we want residents to have the opportunity to not only view this video that we're making tonight, but to review the report as well. And I'm sure we'll communicate more about this topic and solicit more and more feedback. I suspect that this won't be the only meeting of this nature that we have on this topic. Last thing I would want to do is rush into something. So,
Understood. I think what I was asking is
Yeah.
is there a timeline you guys
There's-
keep asking? Because we
time-
have-
there's no, well,
I think that's the first step we have to have in the discussion with the arborists we're talking to is these three that have been identified. What is the timeline for getting those down? I mean, do we need to do them next week or a month from now or?
And I think it's all in,
The risk assessment will have mitigation options in there.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things to keep in mind too is that, yes, we get their recommendations, but then we have to weigh that against what our legal risk is, right? If we execute this, where does our risk profile go? Okay, and is it tenable? I think there was someone back there that was asking.
Yeah, just a couple questions and comments, but thank you for doing all this. Are the trees marked, or can we mark them? Like red ribbon, yellow ribbon? No.
Well, of course they can. I mean, there's no technical reason why they can't. I think the golf club would have some concern about aesthetics. We are putting up, or we have some signs up already about the risk, falling limbs, you know, enter at your own risk kind of signs.
I don't know how to look at your aerial and seeing what trees we're talking about being removed, so you can get an impact.
You don't need it as a warning, you just need to say we know.
No, I got you. Did you get this map at all?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's hard to see, yeah, all right,
When
so,
the report's done too, it'll have, so are you guys gonna publish that
And this is the
report?
one, can we just get a physical marker so if we're walking, we can see what trees we're talking about?
that's a good idea.
What's that?
So you maybe don't walk it.
Yeah, don't walk under
There's
it.
that too. As far as risk, I mean, we're informed now, we can't take the trees out immediately, but someone needs to call the insurance company tomorrow, because we can do that. And if we don't do that, and something happens tomorrow or next week, and you could have changed our policy, most of us
Well,
would be pretty annoyed.
The first call is to the attorney, not the insurance company, right? So, and then before we even had this,
The
or,
attorney's not gonna,
I know, third, believe me, you got
the second call should be the insurance company, should be fairly quickly after the attorney.
you're right, and it will come, but we have no legal obligation right now to inform them. And in fact, we're concerned that they're going to immediately pull the policy. Okay, so before we call them, we need to make sure we have someone that can immediately underwrite us. That's all. So I can tell you, I've been,
It's gonna be for a month until we remediate it, but.
I can tell you, you know, from experience, having been president of the association for 6 years now, nothing is simple in this place. Everything looks simple until you start getting into it. There's detail after detail. And I'm certainly not one that's gonna skip steps.
I also like to make the point that, once the report is ready and the imminent risk trees are identified, the next step is for the community, if they want to move forward, to file for a permit with the town of Mount Pleasant. So, you know, we don't have the final say, the community doesn't have the final say, the town of Mount Pleasant does. And it's highly likely that they'll require, especially based on their size, the trees go to, the decision go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And so then it could take a long time. I found
You have to have insurance. during
Right,
that time.
yeah.
That's all I'm asking.
Yeah. And I was
100% agree.
I was talking toward you, but I was actually answering somebody else's timeline question. Yeah, but as long as the process has started and the community is taking steps, then, you know.
Okay. And then the last piece is, how does the golf club participate in the financing?
Well, so the 3 trees that are there, they'll obviously be liable for the costs with dealing with those trees in however manner they see fit. Of course, we'd like to do this as a partnership. We don't want to have competing interests and things like that. So I'm sure, I don't have any doubt that the golf club's going to work with us, but no, we're not going to be footing the bill for anything for the golf course.
I just think about trees too, because they benefit from the beauty of the trees, and certainly if they receive unreasonable amounts of nitrogen.
Well, I mean, look, listen, so,
And I don't want to
yeah.
say the nitrogen is, I don't want to hang on one component,
No,
right?
I'm not saying it's
Yeah,
not.
what I'm saying is that if a tree is diseased and it's getting nitrogen, that's feeding that disease. The disease is already there. It's contributing to the advancement potentially. But these trees are going in a golf course. You can't expect a golf course to not fertilize their lawn, right? Like, there is a line between progression and preservation. And so we always have to try to strike that balance. How do we progress as society and how do we preserve the environment around us? And then hold on one second, because you had a question right here in the front, and you're so patient.
So, talking about because I know Virginia has the same law, which I experienced before we moved here, that trees of a certain size need to receive a permit to be taken down.
Right.
Which makes total sense because we want to protect the trees. But what protections do we have in place? Like, and if they were to, for some ungodly reason, say that is a tree that is an arborist says is unsafe, what do we do then?
Well, actually, I mean, if the town of Mount Pleasant for some reason denied us, that would be our Hail Mary, because our hands are tied, we can't do anything, right? So we leave the trees alone, and we don't have this meeting no more. And it absolves a lot of liability, but that certainly won't be the case. In terms of protections, I mean, we can only do, until we get the permissions to actually act, as long as we're taking reasonable steps to act and protect the public, our liability is significantly diminished. We can't sit on this for 5 years, that becomes neglect, right? But as long as we're taking reasonable steps, we have somebody working on a plan, we're waiting for community input, the town's working on a permit, you know, if something happens, we're mostly absolved. Yes, ma'am?
So, a few things. Has anyone consulted Clemson? Had someone from Clemson come out that doesn't have any special interest in financially doing advising or?
Well, so we're collecting a total of 4 opinions so far. The 2 solid reports that we have they're not.
Specifically Clemson. They don't
No.
make money off of analyzing, and they're the experts in our state.
We'll look into Clemson and see if they have any, do they have any interest in doing this?
I mean, Clemson will come out, I'm not sure. I'm not sure the answer to that. Clemson will come and provide Clemson does not assess risk. So they will provide a fungal analysis on the wood decay pathogen. Yeah, if the fungus is new enough and they can actually assess it and study it. But no, they will not provide an opinion on the risk of a tree.
And I'm really not asking about risk. There's risk the minute we walk across this threshold.
No.
There's different legal distinctions of risk.
No, I understand. I'm saying, I'm only asking in regard to the diagnosis of the trees. That's all I'm asking about. Has anybody consulted them for that?
No.
As far as the disease?
The disease and what they predict on it, how it's going to affect the tree in time, or anything like that. Their assessment of what's going on with the tree.
Many of the fungal counts can be visually ID'd. They're not going to make a prediction.
Has anybody just?
We will ask Clemson what's their capability.
To see if they
I will
can
take that
come.
on.
Okay, and then as far as identifying the trees, I agree that it would be nice for the neighbors to be able to say which trees actually have visual on it. And I get that the golf course wouldn't really want to have something hugely obvious that, oh gosh, we're going to cut this down. So maybe a little golf flag or something at the bottom of them. Like that.
It's a good idea.
Just sort of is a decorative kind of thing.
That's probably better than the big wrap, so that's a good idea.
That's always a dead giveaway that you're going to cut it.
Yeah.
And then I would also like to add, I've lived here for 64 years, not in Dunes West, and I don't know if anyone else has lived here that long and witnessed one storm after the other, but Hurricane Hugo, if you've ever seen the picture of the golf club prior to Hurricane Hugo and the canopy of those oaks, that is where the damage first occurred. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it's probably a really good point, and that's probably true.
But the growth has been significant since the hurricane as to what they look like. So if you could get a hold of that, the aerial view, you have it actually at the golf club, and then an aerial view post Hugo in '89, I think that it would be good, and then an aerial of now. Just send a drone up now and see what that is.
I know a guy with a drone.
Well, and the damage from Hugo, you get regrowth, but because it's not a strategic pruning, that regrowth is occurring and creating branch junctions that are weak, right? So you have what's called, and it'll be called out in the report, but what's called included bark. So for a branch junction to be proper and a good attachment, it needs to be like a U versus a V. And a lot of times live oaks do this naturally, but after a limb breakage, you have the regrowth of it's called epicormic growth. So it sprouts out new growth because all it's interested in is creating a leaf surface that it can photosynthesize sunlight into sugar, right? And so it regrows as fast as it can, but it's going to grow all these branches really closely together. And if they're not pruned, they're going to keep growing, they're going to get larger and larger, and then you have failure as a result. And so, you know, like was already pointed out, that's a great point. They've regrown, and they have responded to the damage from Hugo, but that also in itself creates a structural issue for the trees.
Sure, and is there a way that, is there a clearance, especially on the right side? I don't know who owns the property, there's more room obviously to reroute a sidewalk that could be out of natural turf, you know, dirt, little gravel, whatever, that meanders closer to far from the drip line of the streets.
So I'll tell you that I'm not opposed to looking at alternatives for the sidewalk in terms of where it is and direction, but in terms of material, it would have to be concrete, because concrete sidewalks fall into ADA.
But what if it changes from a sidewalk to a?
It can't, the
walking
sidewalk
path?
can't dead stop. So there's regulations around it, okay? And
See, there's
it's
a
We'll
way,
take a look, we'll take a look at
a
it.
way to go to a walking path at that point for preservation and for liability reasons, for risk management.
yeah, I mean, I would love nothing more than to be able to route people to a much safer area,
Yeah.
do that easily, and leave the trees alone.
Yeah, because when you see if you live through what happened with those trees and all the trees in this area, you don't want to see this happen.
I agree.
Wow.
Yes, ma'am.
Do the foxes that live in those trees, on some of them, do they deteriorate some of the trees, or does it?
That's a good question. There's wildlife that lives inside of the tree. There's foxes that have burrowed in there. Do they contribute?
I mean, they're going to, you know, they're gonna potentially scratch at some of the compartmentalized wood on the inside. I think that sure, they're doing some damage, but it would be marginal in comparison to the conditions those trees have. I don't think that they're not contributing at a level that's causing the high risk. Yeah. And I mean, and you know, foxes and wildlife need cavities, right? I mean, you can't take down every tree that has a cavity, because then where are the raccoons living? Where are the foxes living? So again, it's trying to strike that balance between progression and preservation and human life, you know?
It seems clear we're heading down a risk mitigation conversation. So I'm gonna ask you a stupid question, and I might have a recommendation. The trees that are sick, is there a more pronounced chance of trees and or limbs falling during inclement weather? Or is there just as much chance of just building falling at any given time?
Always in inclement weather, it's gonna be a higher risk.
Okay.
However, most of the limbs that have come down on those trees were just the middle of daylight. And most of the limbs that I peel off of yards and Old Village, look at the old live oaks in Old Village, right? I mean, we have lots of live oaks that are high risk that we treat and try to mitigate as much as possible. Massive leaders falling in the middle of daylight.
The reason I ask, and again, just in the interest of risk mitigation, is it might be worthy in the short term, in the interim, considering that when we do know we have weather events coming, put a number on it, 40-mile-an-hour winds, 30-mile-an-hour winds, whatever. We shut down sidewalks. Okay? If we know that that's more pronounced risk, just that stretch of road, shut it down. We do it with flooding, we have emergency action plans that we wrote. If that's a time that it's more dangerous, just shut down those sidewalks or anything.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion, and I think that we'll look into that.
The people I worry about are the people living in Hartford Village and Downing Place and Enclave, that's the only way into their homes.
No, I said shut down the sidewalks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Was that a live oak that fell over in the last storm in the island on one of plantation?
It's a red oak.
It was a red oak.
I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, it was a red oak. Still an oak though, still a beautiful tree, and it's terrible. But I mean, there you go. That's a perfect example where you have she could speak to this better, but you have a tree that's been there forever, and then you put a road on both sides of it, and look at how over time, over the course of 20, 30 years, how it weakened and just.
If you go back in history again here, it's interesting, the developer of Dunes West, as you may know, was Georgia Pacific. Georgia Pacific was the first developer of this land. And they're a tree company.
Yep.
And so they're the ones we think probably put those generational trees in 30 years ago when Dunes West was developed. But they're also the ones that cut 2 foot deep to put the subbase in for Wando Plantation to go right between those trees. And of course, when they planted those trees, they planted them far apart for a buggy, but they didn't really plant a 2-lane road with curb and all that kind of stuff. And so You know, those trees, obviously suffered very badly when the road did come in 70 years after those trees were planted. So lots of history that led to this point, I think.
But red oak is a good example of a species that, while it's a hardy species, with root disturbance, with the environmental stresses of, you know, the community, you know, they are more susceptible to disease. They get phytophthora, armillaria, different, more progressive wood decay pathogens. And so you'll hear like water oaks, laurel oaks, willow oaks. Those are trees that right around the 30 to 50-year-old age, they are decaying. They have heart rot, and then secondarily, they have opportunistic pests. Right, these pests are taking advantage of these trees in a weaker state, and those trees we have cleaned up many red oaks here in the community that first have basal decay, so decay at the base, internal decay, and then a termite infestation. I mean, a tree can be big and beautiful, and then it fails, and you look inside, and it's an entire termite colony. So yeah.
Well, we only have a couple minutes left, so any last and final thoughts or questions? Anything you want to throw at us, or? No? All right.
I have one question.
Yes, sir?
Is this disease, these trees have a name? What is the disease?
Primarily, so we've not had any of the fungal comps tested. They have to be brand new in order for Clemson to ID them. I send lots of fungal comps to their to Clemson, to their laboratory. But they definitely have Ganoderma, which is a type of ground rot. And they have white rot pathogens. There's so many different types. So yeah.
Thank you.
Those types of pathogens, so they over the course, like I was saying, phytophthora and armillaria, they advance quickly. They're very progressive. Where Ganoderma is a slower moving disease, but these trees have had Ganoderma for a long time. And if you look, and you'll see it in the reports, the branch failure, you can see inside these massive leaders, the whole inside of a limb should be where the heartwood is, should be almost white, right? It should be a lighter color. And these are just completely brown and checkered. I mean, it's been digesting the lignin, the sugar inside of the heartwood for a long time.
All right.
Just real quick.
Last question.
This 3 to 5 trees, what do you think is the approximate time frame to get action going?
I don't think we'd probably do anything for at least 90 days. I don't think we'd do anything for at least 90 days.
Okay, that's pretty quick.
I think that would be earliest.
Yeah, that would be the earliest, yeah.
Well, the new board also would be dealing with it, so.
Yes, ma'am.
When you do take out the older trees, how do you mitigate the damage to the younger oaks that are between them?
Yeah, well, like she mentioned, you know, proper care, moving forward, keeping an eye on them, not ignoring them and neglecting them, like these were, unfortunately.
Well, these are not necessarily neglected, they were just old technology,
Yeah.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
And, you know, she's been on for a couple of years now, but yeah, they probably could have taken some more care over the years from the developers, and then maybe our board, I don't know.
Yeah. Remember, the developers only care about selling houses. They could care less what's left behind.
Yeah.
We're left picking up the mess on so many things. I mean, Riverview, and then the other community right back here. I mean, half their landscaping died after the fact, and now that's on us. Developers.
So Pulte's gone, guys. Pulte's gone.
Yes.
I will say with everybody here, and since we have an audience, we are extremely passionate in tree preservation, especially preservation of trees in construction. And if you care about the Alley of Oaks, you care about the oaks in Mount Pleasant and all of the trees, and I just encourage you to attend the Mount Pleasant the council meetings, committee meetings. There's going to be one this Thursday at 9 a.m. that's talking about the assigning greater protection, so greater tree protection zones for trees. If you have time, I strongly encourage you to go, because the greater the space around them, between the impact and their canopy, the more likely they are to survive. So,
All right, I'd like to thank everybody. And,
I was going to say, by example, how old is the angel oak really?
nobody really
Nobody really
There's no roads around.
If I can ask for a round of applause for Ashley. Yeah, and just so you remember, this video will be posted to the website soon, so If you missed anything, you can always rewatch it.